Welcome to the wedding, my amazing guests. Well, amazing as long as you didn't forget to send an RSVP or wrote in on the invitation that you're bringing 6 uninvited plus ones. But I guess it could be a lot worse. After all, we are about to do a countdown in today's Bumblebee video on the top 10 scary marriage traditions in ancient Rome. In order to truly understand the wedding traditions of both ancient Rome and the ones of our modern day, we need to learn about number 10, the women of Sabine. So if you haven't seen it yet, we recently released the top 10 messed up marriage traditions in ancient Rome, and I definitely recommend giving these 2 videos a watch consecutively. As in that one, you'll learn more about the traditions and the ceremony itself. This video, more nitty-gritty, baby. So, to recap, this story first takes place when Rome was first established, like fresh off the press, just a small military settlement in 753 BCE. As a result, its entire population was men, which, don't get me wrong, Roman soldiers could work with the same way Greek ones could, but because their mommies had done all the work for them their entire lives and now they can't wash dishes or even a shirt, they sought out replacement mommies, aka wives. Where and how do you get wives when there are no women? The answer to that question was to steal any women of childbearing age from the neighboring township of Sabine. These women were ripped from their mothers and fathers and carried in large processions back to Rome, where they were forced into marriage via physicality. Their fathers, brothers, and former husbands came to wage war and win the women back, but the women of Sabine felt it was too late. Now forced into motherhood and marriage to the soldiers, the women of Sabine throw themselves in between the evil men who are now the fathers of their children and the men who they'd been stolen from, begging that bloodshed end, wanting to live neither fatherless nor widowed. So a truce is called, and Sabine and Rome united their communities. So let's do a traditional breakdown in the following part of the countdown. What traditions ended up coming from this? Number 9 will be stolen goods. So one result of Rome literally starting off as a mass theft of ladies and their autonomy, it developed a super fun mindset and tradition that the only bride of value was one that hadn't been deflowered and had been stolen from her family. This went in 2 directions. So, first, marriage continued to be theft, not like a ha ha ha, steal the bride. This was like actual theft of a person and a forceful marriage. This is how it was in the early days of Rome for a few hundo years. Obviously, it can't stay that way forever because people do feel love and some people want to get married in a non-effed up way, so the tradition goes the second way. That theft would be continued, but as a consenting reenactment. In a consenting reenactment, after the marriage ceremony, a bride would hug her father, then hold her mother, at which point the guests and the groomsmen would pull her from her mother's arms in a recreation of what happened to the Sabines, and that she should cry out in pain and weep as she was heralded along the route to her new house, even if they were faking it, just as the Sabines had. And that's when number 8 comes in, the best man. So before the theft was a reenactment and it was still the real deal stuff, the best man and or groomsmen were crucial. If a bride's family was to steal back their daughter before the consummation occurs, this man or men's purpose was to literally guard the bride and fight her family. That's why he was called a best man. He was usually whatever man the groom knew who was best at fighting. And if he didn't want to risk getting his own butt kicked, well, he better bring his groomsmen. The more, the better. According to Country Living, the presence of groomsmen and best men was also to ensure that the bride, who in many situations was literally stolen, didn't make a break for it herself. This is why the best man stands up there next to the groom and bride instead of behind the door frame with a baseball bat, waiting for his homie's new father-in-law to come break down the door. If a fight's going to break out, you need your best fighter right there ready to go, or to tackle a runaway bride. Stolen or not, once you're married, it's time for number 7, the darkened threshold. The practice of the groom carrying the bride across the threshold of their new home or bedroom doorway dates back to the forcible actions taken on the Sabines as they fought tooth and nail to escape the soldiers. When it evolved and became part of a reenactment, the brides would continue to be carried through the threshold, but with a lot more steps in the process. So after that long and dramatic reenactment procession I mentioned, and the guests and the groom whipping walnuts at her the whole time to represent leaving childish things behind, since nuts, which was its name, was a child's name in ancient Rome. The bride would then be put down outside the front door. She would oil the door's hinges with melted tallow, wolf fat, or olive oil to keep out sorcery. Then she would hang some woolen strips taken out of her elaborate hairstyle on the door as a symbol of her taking over the traditional wives' duty of weaving wool, but also to represent the scraps of material torn off of the Sabines. To go inside her new home, the groomsmen would then lift the bride over the threshold and into the house's atrium. The threshold was sacred to the goddess Vesta, so Romans believed that carrying the woman across the threshold would ensure she avoid tripping, a bad omen. This, however, is also a reference to the Sabine women being carried inside of captors' homes. Number 6, we move away from the Sabine reenactment specific traditions. It's now cuffed up. So fun fact, it was under Romans that the detailed legal requirements for engagements, weddings, and divorce were first instituted. Given that marriage in ancient Rome was something that required strict adherence to law, it may not be surprising that it was also regarded as a contract, thus a ring was necessary. Women in ancient Rome society were given 2 wedding rings, an iron one and a gold one. The iron was stylized in the early times of Rome to look like or even act as a functioning key, indicating their husbands owned them and they were a homemaker. This ring was worn at home, whilst the second was worn in public to impress people. The most common type of ring associated with Roman marriages was the fede ring, which has a design showing a pair of clasped hands or an entwined couple. Less charming is how they're representative of a contract that's comparable to a farmer buying cows. The ring would act as a receipt and passing of ownership between the father to the future husband. That's why only women wore rings, because men weren't property. Going hand in hand with that last point is number 5, dowry on a finger. You know that whole selfish notion that if they really love you, they'll spend a fortune on a ring because that's what you're worth? Guess where that comes from? Creepy, right? Nowadays, it can be obvious from a ring how much someone paid for it, but back in ancient Rome, looking at a ring was how you established how much a woman was worth. And you could base how much you should respect her on that. Cheap ring, that means a small dowry and an unworthy woman. Yikes. In fact, author Karen K. Hirsch notes that rings were often used for this purpose in regular business transactions in Rome, making it very possible they entered the wedding ceremony with that mindset around the 15th or 16th century. The groom would offer a ring as a sign of his serious intention, offering up some collateral that the bride could keep if he decided to back out of the engagement. Rings were sometimes used as a deposit on the expected dowry or as a simple payment to the bride as part of her acquisition. For number 4, if you got some bad luck, bouquet it. So, having a pantheon of multiple gods is going to create some strong superstitions. Gods were jealous and had to be pacified with gifts and praise so that they would behave and grant wishes. Sometimes these gifts took the form of a handful of wheat or garlands and fragrant herbs. The origin of the bridal bouquet stems back to ancient Rome when bridal couples would weave greenery and blossoms into garlands and crowns scented with roses or orange blossoms, adding herbs to honor the gods and promote fertility and good fortune, says Valerie Gittleman. Strands of ivory illustrated the strong bond of matrimony and fidelity, while white blossoms symbolize sweetness and happiness. Sheaves of wheat, for example, symbolize plenty and good harvests, i.e. fertility, which alongside faithfulness were the topmost virtues of ancient marriage. These garlands would be found on the altar spaces, on the groom's head, wound into the intricate 6-vestal bridal hairstyle, and naturally in the cluster the bride carries, all meant to ward off evil spirits that might try to harm her. Speaking of hair and bridal beauty, how about the Roman candle for number 3? I talked about the flammeum in the last video about Roman marriage, but more so about what it represents and its purposes. As you may know, had you seen it, the flammeum is a oak yellow color. However, it didn't start this way, rather as a vibrant orange-red color designed to look like fire so it would scare off evil spirits. Also, it does explain the name flammeum to you. This flammeum also covered the bride's entire body in a 360 style, and originally they were weighed down with like heavy leaf garlands, precious stones, real rocks if you're broke. This was to prevent her, or at least try to slow her down if she was to try and run away. Why the change to yellow? Sun fading on veils passed down through the centuries. The concern for evil spirits lessened. People liked the color mustard yellow. I don't know, take your pick. What stayed the same was having to use a billion pins to keep the damn thing on. Thankfully, the 6-braid vestal virgin hairstyle was conducive to that, but it was also conducive to hiding weapons. Circling us back to the Sabine and captured bride concept. Before a bride was allowed into the marriage bed, it became code that all jewelry that could be used as a weapon by the bride would have to be removed, including hairpins, bracelets, rings, and necklaces. Turns out some smart ladies kept some blades between their veil and scalp to protect themselves from their unwanted husbands once behind closed doors. I'm sure their Sabine ancestors would have been proud of them. This one's a little odd, but you may now kiss the priest, in at number 2. Pre-Christianity, kissing in Rome was actually a greeting. Before you picture a hot and sloppy makeout sesh, that's not the case. I mean a peck or little brushy brush of the lips. It was done between strangers, nobility, and family. Hell, they had to put laws in place to get people to stop laying them on each other when pandemics would break out so less people would die. It wasn't a romantic thing in the slightest. Common for friends to kiss one another's closed eyelids, necks, and mouths, and considered a great privilege to greet members of your own family with a kiss. This rule was not to be broken or followed incorrectly. As Christianity took root in ancient Rome, the act of kissing became shamed remained, alongside nudity, intercourse, and just about anything that was natural. What did remain was the kiss of peace. These were initially acceptable between men and women, but over time, Rome went from a kiss-friendly to no-tongue action township. Because God forbid you kiss someone thanks for the loaf of bread you bought and feel a tingle somewhere. I know you bought bread from her every day for the last 13 years before now and kissed her thanks every time, but you never know. Today could be the day you defy God and embrace the devil. Tisk tisk, Romans. Anyways, jokes aside, despite the casual greeting kiss and the romantic kisses before marriage being banned, the kiss of peace remained, and one of the times that kiss happened was at the marriage ceremony, where the priest would turn to the groom and absolutely lay one on the guy. After that, the groom has to turn to the bride and give her some sloppy tongue action next. Idea was that the priest passed a blessing through his mouth to the grooms and the groom would pass it to the bride. Thus why the groom can kiss the bride and not the other way around. And last but not least, it's everyone's favorite gals, the bridesmaids. Number 1. Bridesmaids are as much a sight to behold as the bride herself, mostly because back in the day, they dressed almost exactly the same as the bride. Complete opposite of the downright offensive thing some of y'all have your best friends wear. Girl, if you love her, you wouldn't make her wear that shade of pink that she can't. Anyways, the Romans believed that the bride, being so pretty, is easy prey for vengeful spirits that would harm her. Thus, the bouquets, the flammium, and now the bridesmaids, aka decoy brides. These maidens' purposes were literally to confuse evil spirits. They would dress identical to each other in an outfit somewhat similar to the bride's own. Since the bridesmaids would be surrounding the bride and look so similar to one another, it was believed the evil spirits would become confused and fly off somewhere else. Reader's Digest also noted the use of bridesmaids in a similar fashion to the best man, confusing rival lovers or even criminals seeking to take the bride. As a result, the tradition of bridesmaids wearing identical dresses to the bride persisted until the 1880s. Of course, modern bridesmaids who consider the role less of an honor than a job with the terrible uniform should consider something else noted by Reader's Digest. In ancient times, bridesmaids were literally the bride's maids. At least these days, you're getting drunk on a yacht with her. Alrighty, thank you so much for tuning in, and I hope you enjoyed. Be sure to like and subscribe to see more from us, and until next time, drop a comment down below on if you think you could fight an entire bachelor party for your bride.